Hello, and welcome to the Permission to Breathe podcast, a transformative space dedicated to providing a sanctuary where you can inhale deeply and exhale freely, embracing your grief journey unapologetically. I am your host, Dr. Tammy Isaac, here with you every Monday to offer comfort, guidance, and hope. Together we'll navigate this path, finding moments to pause, reflect, and breathe. Let's begin this journey side by side. Today's episode is brought to you by Collateral Beauty, a Black woman's metamorphosis of grief, self-love, and healing by Dr. Tammy Isaac. For generations, Black women have carried invisible burdens, grieving in silence under the weight of societal expectations and trauma. Now it's time to embrace healing, self-love, and the beauty that remains. In Collateral Beauty, Dr. Tammy Isaac invites you on a powerful journey through grief, faith, and renewal. This book will guide you to process grief and trauma with intention, discover self-love and inner strength, build deeper connections through sisterhood and faith, and embrace vulnerability, forgiveness, and gratitude as tools for growth. Take the first step toward embracing your beauty, your story, and your healing journey. Don't wait. Grab a copy today on Amazon. Welcome to the Permission to Breathe podcast, where we give ourselves the space to grieve, heal, and most importantly, breathe. I'm your host, Dr. Tammy Isaac, and if you've ever experienced a loss, you might know exactly what I'm about to describe. Imagine this. You're in the middle of a conversation and suddenly you forget what you were about to say. Or maybe you walk into a room and for the life of you, you cannot remember what you went in there for. Maybe you find yourself rereading the same sentence over and over because your brain just won't process it. And if this sounds familiar, you're not alone. What you're experiencing is often called grief brain fog, and it's a very real part of the grieving process. You know, grief isn't just emotional because it impacts our minds, our memories, our ability to focus, and even our decision making. But the question is, why does this happen? What's going on inside of our brains when we're grieving? And more importantly, how do we work through it with grace and patience and faith? Well, that's exactly what we're diving into today. And we're going to break down why grief affects the brain the way it does, how it might be showing up in your daily life, and some practical ways to be able to navigate this mental fog with gentleness and understanding. And I want you to hear this. You're not broken. You're not crazy. You're not losing your mind. Your brain is just grieving along with you. So grab a seat, grab a cup of tea, find a quiet place, and let's talk about it. Because healing isn't just about our hearts. It's also about our minds too. So let's take a deep breath. And let's begin. While grief is deeply emotional and spiritual, it is also biological. It changes how our brains function, and understanding this can help us be more compassionate with ourselves and others as we navigate this journey. Dr. Mary Frances O'Connor, whom I love, by the way, is a neuroscientist and author of The Grieving Brain. She has done some incredible work in helping us understand what happens to the brain when we experience loss. So in her book, she explains that grieving is not just something we feel, it's also something our brain has to learn. And learning, she says, takes effort, energy, and time. Now, think about it. When we lose someone we love, our brain doesn't just automatically update like a computer and accept that our loved one is gone. Instead, what happens is our brain is wired for attachment, and it still expects that person to walk through the door, to answer the phone, or be in their usual place. And that's part of our brain responsibility for recognizing patterns and habits and relationships. It's the default mode network that keeps looking for them. And this mismatch between expectation and reality ends up creating confusion, mental exhaustion, and what we often call brain fog. When we experience loss, our brain goes through a period of rewiring of sorts. The connections that once involved our loved one are now having to be reorganized. And that process takes a lot of cognitive effort. So let's break down what actually is happening. So when we think about the stress response and cortisol overload, when we grieve, our brain perceives loss as a major stressor, which then triggers the release of cortisol, which is the stress hormone. This flood of cortisol impacts the prefrontal cortex, the part of the brain that is responsible for our focus, memory, and decision making. And that makes it hard for us to think clearly as we're grieving. And this is why you might find yourself misplacing things, forgetting conversations, or struggling to make small decisions like what to eat for dinner. I recently had a friend who's a coworker who was coming upon the day of the anniversary of her husband's death. And she was supposed to be at work, and everybody was calling her like, "Where are you?" And she was like, "I'm at home." She was like, "I'm not supposed to be at work," but she really was supposed to be at work. And she called me. She was just like, "I'm crazy. I'm crazy." And I'm like, "You're not crazy. This is a brain fog, right? This is a part of the grief as you are remembering and experiencing your husband's death for the first time, for the first year, right? So those are things that are happening. And one of the things I did share was for her to be gracious with herself, and then all of us around her understood what was happening, and we also extended grace and love and compassion for her so that she could continue to make it throughout the day. All right. So the next thing is like the survival mode and cognitive prioritization. So grief shifts our brain into a survival state. It's trying to conserve energy and focus on just the basic functioning rather than like higher level of thinking. And this is why tasks that once felt really simple, like following a recipe, driving to a familiar place, or remembering a password, can suddenly feel very much overwhelmed. So I'll give you an example. I just started my last class for my certification in my clinical classes, and we got a syllabus, and I'm a stickler for having all the information, everything dot, dot, dot. And we got this syllabus. It had everything in there that we needed. And I opened it and was looking through it, and I felt so overwhelmed and confused because it just felt like so much. But I kept saying to myself, but this is the way I like my information. I like to have everything spelled out, A, B, C, D, everything here. But just looking at the syllabus made me so overwhelmed because, as I mentioned in the previous podcast episode, that it was the anniversary of my mother's death, which is also the day of my birth, right? And so navigating that journey was a task already, and then having to read through a syllabus. And I just had to sit it aside, and I just did what I could do. And when I had my individual supervision, my educator just went back through the syllabus and explained everything to me line by line, which was very helpful because at that point, my brain was in that survival mode, just prioritizing what was most important. And even the simplest things, as I mentioned, becomes overwhelming. And so the brain is trying to conserve energy by only focusing on what's the basic things. Okay. The third thing, so I told you about the stress response, the survival mode, and now let's talk about the default mode. The default mode, network and mental confusion. So, as Dr. O'Connor explains in her book, The Grieving Brain, our brain is designed to predict the future based on past experiences. So, when someone we love dies, our brain doesn't immediately accept it. It continues to anticipate their presence. And this leads to moments where we might expect to see or hear them only to be hit with the painful realization that they're gone. And this back and forth between expectation and reality is mentally exhausting. And it contributes to the feeling of the brain fog because it's having to remember all over again that they're gone, and then thinking, okay, having the expectation of this is what's going to happen today because this was our routine. And then you have to remind yourself, know that they're not here. And it's just exhausting. I know for me in the beginning, I traveled a lot previously. And I would travel alone. And whenever I would make it to my destination, get in my hotel room, get settled, the first phone call I would make would be to my mom. And I remember traveling after her death, getting to the hotel, and this was months after, settling in, and I picked up the phone to call her. And instantly I was struck with the reality of she's no longer there to even receive my call. And so having those moments where your brain is in and out of expectation and reality can be very exhausting, which also supports brain fog, right? So here's the last one: sleep disruptions, fatigue. So grief often disrupts sleep cycles, whether it's trouble falling asleep, waking up in the middle of the night, or experiencing vivid dreams. And the lack of sleep further impacts memory, further impacts your concentration and your emotional regulation. This also, too, I have experience with. After my mom's death, I had insomnia. I would sleep in spurts of like maybe 10 to 20 minutes and then be back up. I would have trouble even falling asleep. As some days I wouldn't sleep. I was given medication to sleep. Um, there were also times I had very vivid dreams. I was dreaming every night for months. I don't even think I really shared this with anybody. Um, but I was having dreams of me trying to save her life. And I don't know if maybe my brain was trying to save me from that by keeping me awake. But I would have those dreams, and which, supports the brain fog and impacts my memory and my concentration, but also just the emotional frustration of trying to regulate my emotions going back and forth. So when you're struggling to focus, when you can't remember simple things, when your thoughts feel sluggish, it's not because you're broken. It's not because you're crazy. It's not because you're weak, right? Your brain is doing what it was designed to do: process. It has to process what's happening. It processes your loss. It processes your love for that person, the deep emotional shift. It's processing the change in your life. And all of that takes energy for your brain to process and help you navigate through your journey of grief. And here's something important to remember: grief doesn't mean forgetting. right? It means learning to live with the absence of someone who was deeply woven in the fabric of your life. So grief is not about, traveling and traversing through our grief journey and living our life from that standpoint. Is not about forgetting so I don't have to deal with all these other things, right? So I don't have to deal with brain fog. I don't have to deal with the mental disruption. It's not about that. It's about allowing our brain to process what's happening in all of our emotions so that we can learn to live with the absence of that person that we love. Are you grieving and feel like you're struggling alone? You don't have to walk this path by yourself. Book a virtual session with Dr. Tammy Isaac at Breathe Grief Counseling Center. Visit us online at www.breathegriefcounselingcenter.com. Dr. Isaac will help you put your emotions into words. She'll help you reduce the feeling of isolation. She'll help you understand that everyone grieves differently and also help you prevent unhealthy coping mechanisms. Take control of your life with world-class counseling sessions today with Dr. Tammy Isaac. The most popular questions people ask when experiencing brain fog is, how long does it last? And the truth is, there isn't a set time. There isn't a time limit. For some, brain fog may last a few days or weeks and gradually improve as they process their loss. But for others, it can linger for months or even years, especially if the grief is complicated or tied to a traumatic loss. Now, I do want to be very clear. You are not stuck like this forever. Okay, I repeat, you are not stuck like this forever. The fog will lift, though it may take time. Healing from grief is not linear, and neither is the way our minds adjust to the loss, right? But if brain fog begins to interfere with your daily life, your work, your relationships, your ability to care for yourself, it might be time to seek extra support, like a healthcare provider, a therapist, a grief counselor can also help you find strategies so that you can reduce its impact and begin to regain a sense of clarity, a sense of mental clarity. So can brain fog be prevented? Not entirely, okay? It's a natural part of how our minds process loss, but there are ways to support your mental and physical health so that the symptoms don't feel so overwhelming. When I think about brain fog, it reminds me of The Hobbit, The Desolation of Smaug. Now, if you've ever seen the movie, you might remember how so much of the journey through the Middle Earth was covered in mist and uncertainty. And then there's Smaug, the great dragon that's lurking beneath the surface, right? There's something about the visual of all that fog, all that disorientation that makes me think of how grief clouds our minds. And it's hard to see the path ahead. It's hard to tell what's real and what's just the weight of fear or exhaustion. And much like in the movie, the fog is our minds making everything feel more daunting and more impossible to really navigate. But here's the thing, just like in The Hobbit, the fog doesn't last forever. Eventually, the path becomes clear again and we find our way forward, even if it's one step at a time. According to Dr. Schulman, even the effects of long-term chronic stress, including brain fog, it's reversible. Okay. She explains that mindfulness and relaxation practices can help reset the nervous system and restore mental clarity. So some of those strategies include things like journaling, writing out your thoughts, and they help to internalize your grief, making it feel a little bit more manageable. going to therapy, getting cognitive behavior therapy, restructuring your negative thought patterns can help bring awareness and healing. When we think about therapy or in counseling, speaking with a professional can provide you with tools so that you can work through your trauma with somebody who's experienced. Maybe using your creativity. I've heard of people using different types of arts to process grief. I've heard of a woman who dances, right? You can engage in music and art and other creative outlets that can help the brain begin to process emotions in a non-verbal way, right? Because even with mental fog, it's hard to even get out your thoughts or have a conversation. And the other thing is, if you're spiritual in some type of way or have a faith, is to meditate and pray, finding stillness in the presence of God or through mindful breathing allows your brain to experience safety and also calmness again. Dr. Schulman also reminds us that if we don't work through the traumatic experiences that we have, then they will continue to be an obstacle in our lives, right? And grief in many ways can be trauma. It depends on the way that we understand the world, how we uh, focus to reshape our reality. But know that healing is absolutely possible, right? You won't be stuck in this mental brain fog. And also understanding that taking small intentional steps can help move you forward even through the fog. And most importantly, as I always say, be patient with yourself. Give yourself some grace. Brain fog is not a failure of your mind. It's just a sign that your brain and your body are working through your healing. Your mind loved someone and now it's learning how to live in their absence, right? That's no small task, right? So give yourself grace to heal at your own pace and not the pace of the world or anyone around you. And listen, if you're experiencing brain fog, I want you to remember this. It will not always be this way. The clarity will return. The light will come back. But until then, breathe through it. Take it one moment at a time and trust that healing is unfolding in ways that you may not can see yet. As we close today's conversation, I want to remind you that brain fog is not a sign that something is wrong with you. Okay. It is a natural response to loss. It's a sign that your brain and your body are processing something deeply painful. And while it may feel frustrating and confusing and even exhausting, this fog is temporary. It may take time, but clarity will come back again. Today, we've explored the science behind grief and brain fog and how it impacts daily life and the ways we can support ourselves through it, whether that's through mindfulness, journaling, counseling, creativity, or simply just allowing ourselves to slow down and just breathe. As Dr. Claire Bidwell Smith reminds us in her book, The Conscious Grieving, she says that brain fog is an invitation to be honest or to be present with our emotions rather than push them away. It is in those quiet, intentional moments, she says, that we begin to find our way back to clarity. So today, if you're in the fog right now, be gentle with yourself. Let your mind and heart move at their own pace. The path forward may not always be clear, but step by step, breath by breath, you're moving through it. And you don't have to do it alone. If this episode resonated with you, I'd love to hear your thoughts. Share your experience with brain fog and your grief in the comments, or comment with me on social media. And if you found this helpful, don't forget to subscribe to Permission to Breathe podcast for more conversations on grief, healing, and faith. Until next time, remember to give yourself permission to breathe, because you are worthy of grace, healing, and of the time it takes to find your way forward. Thank you so much for joining me today on the Permission to Breathe podcast. I hope today created space for you to breathe and find peace on your journey. I invite you to join me again next Monday for another episode as we continue to navigate this path together. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and to share the podcast. Until next time, take care and keep breathing unapologetically.